Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name's Stuart Elliott, and I'm your host for this webinar. I'm the Principal Consultant at Great Place to Work, Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. Great Place to Work acknowledges the traditional owners of the many places that you're joining the webinar this morning, and we pay our respects to the elders past and present. We acknowledge the continuing connection that traditional owners have with the waters, lands, and communities. If you haven't joined us with one of these before, Great Place to Work is the global authority on workplace culture. It's our mission to build a better world by helping organisations become a great place to work for all. I'm thrilled this morning to be joined by people who are like-minded, people who share a passion for this diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. From Sydney, Mary Hogg. Mary is the Regional Human Resources Director of Hilton Hotels. Hilton is over 100 years old and has more than 1 million rooms in more than 120 countries around the world. Welcome, Mary. Next, Karen Clancy. Karen is the People Director for Australia and New Zealand for Specsavers. Specsavers is a leading optical and audiology business with more than 2,000 branches around the world. Welcome, Karen. And last, but by no means least, joining us from Southern California, from Santa Ana, is Brian Reeves. Brian is the Executive Vice President, Chief Belonging, Equity and Impact Officer from our key sponsor today, UKG. UKG is a leading provider of HR, payroll and workforce management solutions for more than 80,000 organisations around the world. And so welcome, Brian. And I'd like to acknowledge and just really sort of call out how grateful we are for UKG coming on board to help us host such a great event. And because of my gratitude, you're going to get the first question.
Yeah, and Mickey Mouse, who's down the road, is going to answer it. No, thank you so much, Stuart.
Yeah, no. So Brian was saying before that Santa Ana is right near Anaheim in California. So at the end of this session in the afternoon for Brian, he's off to Disneyland to ride a few rides and see Mickey. But here's my question for you, Brian. Look, we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, but I wanted to start just with a more general question around what do you need to be a great place to work? What constitutes a great place to work from your perspective?
Great questions. Certainly a privilege to share this conversation with you and Karen and Mary. In UKG, we have the great privilege and fortune to have a great place to work as part of the UKG family. So my answer to you really is informed by 30 plus years of their research and over 100 million employee voices of what are the things necessary to be a great place to work. And there are really four pillars to it. The first is the relationship between a leader and an employee, and that relationship is based on trust. And trust as measured by, fulfilling promises, credibility, respect, as well as fairness. So that's a fundamental relationship within a great place to work that is very strong, but it doesn't end there. It then moves to, if you think about the employee in the center of that with a trustful relationship with their leader, they also must have a prideful relationship with their work. And when I talk about, pride in work, it really is for many people where they don't see it as just tasks. They see this, they have a deep sense of meaning and purpose as to what they do, and they know how their work inures benefit and great benefit to the company that they work for. And then last but not least, in this, if you think about now, we have the trustful relationship between the employee and their leader, and a prideful relationship between the employee and their work is just as important as the relationship they have with their team. And that in the root of that relationship for a great place to work is camaraderie. And the way that shows up, and I know many people hopefully on this call could feel it, is I always tell people, when you describe your teammates as family, they have my back, I will do anything for them, that is a form of camaraderie, and it's the strength of the connections between people. And if you think about all of those and stringing them all together, it has to be for all. So when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, whether you're talking about ethnicity, whether you're talking about race, you're talking about gender, you're talking about generations, you talk about differently able people, you're speaking about neurodiversity, this model has to work for all. So a great place to work encompasses all of those and for everyone. And I hope that helps, Stuart, in answering your question.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's fantastic. Karen, Mary, any further things to add to Brian's fairly comprehensive answer to that?
Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
Okay. It's many things, I believe, but for us, it's our people. They're the heartbeat of our organisation. And we always believe great companies are built with great people, from our joint venture partners and teams in stores to people here in the support offices. It's our teams and passion and dedication that create a great place to work. And we're really fortunate to have worked for a company that truly has a great culture and shared purpose, which is to change lives through better sight and hearing. And I also believe we believe that it's actually the job of leaders to provide an environment where people can be the best version of themselves, and in turn, they then provide the best experience and service for our customers. So it's probably not as long and in depth as Brian's, but that's just,
I know, that's excellent. Mary, Hilton Hotels was named World's Best Workplace in 2023. So you've got a sort of a high bar there that you've set. What is it about Hilton that has actually been recognised, and especially in that space around diversity and inclusion? What do you think Hilton's doing that stands it out from the rest?
Look, it's a great question. And back in November, when we received this accolade, I mean, there was just an incredible amount of global pride around, I think really seeing the culmination of efforts, particularly over the last 10 years, where we have been, we've spent 8 years on really partnering very closely with Great Place to Work and the Great Place to Work family. We have contributed to country lists in something like on 460 occasions since 2016. So I guess there's never a silver bullet. There's no great secret that I can let you into. It is about persistence. It is about living by your values, and it is about true leadership buy-in at every single level in the organization. There is nobody that we have to persuade that DE&I or that, team member engagement and belonging, we don't have to persuade anyone that's a good idea, because that's the value that they show up with. And I think that really clear global intent, the fact that we measure it, again, consistently, it is not a soft measure. It is something which, it is a part of our remuneration packages for our leaders. It is a part of our general conversations. If you're in a meeting and actually it's very homogenous, the most senior person in that room will call it out and say, who are we not listening to? Because this room all looks the same. So, I mean, I guess that's my lengthy way of saying, look, it's the persistence, the culture, and the consistency. But in terms of, I guess, the measurements that we use, what we have really dug into is knowing that it's beyond gut instinct. We may believe that we can do better in some spaces than others. And if the measure doesn't exist, then we need to partner with the experts to find it. So whether that is working with influencers who may well have much more of a finger on the pulse in the space than than perhaps we might, or whether it's to do with working with third parties to try to get that research in place, we need to make sure that the actions that we're taking are quantifiable, measurable, and are actually shifting the dial to the communities that we want to influence and impact. They're not just making us feel good as a leadership team because we're doing something.
Yeah.
And then just to tie up that really quickly, there was a couple of practicalities, I suppose. You've got the balanced shortlists, you've got team member resource groups. We promote people when they're 70% ready so that they can grow into leadership roles in a style that suits them. There is a whole bunch of practical things that we do, but it is not owned by the HR team. It is something that our leaders own, understand, and take pride in. So all of those things together. So if you can just nail all of those, then you can be world number one as well.
But what I really like about that is that you didn't just all of a sudden say, first year you actually put in, you got world number one. It actually was years of work and getting feedback and building and learning from the feedback you were getting, and then saying, how do we incrementally get better and better every year? And if you can continue to get better and better every year, you might end up at number one as well. Karen, you've been quite vocal about the need for employees to be able to bring their full selves to work. And when we talk about things like inclusion and belonging, that's really what it means. How does Specsavers make that possible for people? What advice would you give to other organisations?
It's probably a bit like what Mary's been talking about, is that the first piece of advice is to ensure there is buy-in alignment to the benefits of a diverse workforce throughout your organisation. Here at Specsavers, it's part of our global long-term strategy, which I believe puts inclusion right at the heart of our goals. And diversity inclusion is supported by our founding owners, Doug and Mary, our executives, our regional boards throughout the business, meaning there's strong buy-in and support at a leadership and strategic level, which I think is critical to support change throughout the space. And our global D&I commitment is to have an inclusive culture where everyone feels welcome, valued, and proud to belong. And how we make this practically possible is that it's not a HR-led initiative. What we've done is we've formed a diversity inclusion working group, and the group consists of a mix of colleagues across all our support teams and field teams, our stores, and it focuses on providing advice to the business on key initiatives, celebrations, opportunities, to ensure we're supporting our people, what they need and what they want. And from that, we then formed, from that working group, we identified that actually there's some really good, it's also sponsored by leaders, but we've launched some employee-led networks and some other great initiatives. So, for example, we've got 2 employee-led networks at the moment. One's called Parenthood, and that really supports and connects our parents to manage and challenge the challenges of raising families, along with having a great career. And the second one is Prism, which is here to empower LGBTQIA, I always probably get that wrong, plus probably missed a symbol, so sorry, colleagues in stores and support office to help create an environment where they belong and they feel safe. So it's actually the power of the people that I believe helps with diversity inclusion. And that's what sort of like a follow-on from what Mary was saying. Can't just be from HR.
Brian, in Karen's response there, she used the word belonging about 3 or 4 times.
Yes.
What's your take on belonging and how it's different to inclusion? Because, you know, we talk about DEI and B and you've got inclusion and belonging. Are they different? And if so, how?
They are different, and if you notice when you introduced my title, belonging is the first word in the title, along with equity and impact, and the reason that is, Stuart and everyone, is it's the only thing. If you think about diversity, you can measure it, mathematically or otherwise. You can think about sort of equity, pro rata distributions. There's a mathematical thing to that. When you start to get into inclusion, that one is very interesting. In fact, a lot of companies think that that's the key. But for me, it's that one as well. As you can think you've included someone, but they can feel not to be included. And so I can go away thinking I'm doing a great job, and the person can feel that they weren't included. But belonging is the only one of all of those 4 words where it is an individual sense. I can't tell you you belong. Only you can feel as though you belong. So that's why I think if you really think about at an individual level and everything that Mary and Karen said, the individual has to feel it. The company has to create an environment, but every individual has to feel it. And I think belonging is the ultimate measure. There's a great quote, just to simplify it out a bit, by Verna Meyer. She does this role or did this role for Netflix, and she said, diversity is being asked to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. But when I saw that, I was like, well, but belonging is dancing to your favorite song, because you well know that if you're at a party and the song isn't nice, even though you're dancing, you don't like the song. But if you hear your jam, you're all in. And then for me, equity is being able to host the party, because that is the person we all look to, the convener. So belonging to me is, they're all different, they're all important, they're all needed, but belonging is really the being. Getting to that level, then that you have a great place to work if everybody belongs.
And now I can't get the image of you dancing to your jam out of my mind.
Exactly.
But The other thing while I've got you is that you've written, and I want to sort of talk about equity for a moment.
Yes.
When you think about that issue of equity, which is around that distribution and the formula, you've written that we can't treat pay equity as simply as a compensation problem, that it also encompasses things like opportunity and well-being. A lot of organisations are measuring equity through the formulaic compensation and things like that. But what do you mean in terms of the further ways in which we should be looking at equity?
Yeah, just by definition, if you think of pay equity, two simple words, but very complex topic, and intersectionality has to play a huge role. For example, we did a study with Harvard Business Review in 2022 and then published in 2023, and it talked about the 18-cent gap between people who identify as men and women, with women earning 82 cents on the US dollar, if you would. But if you go to that next level and understand that that gap widens significantly when you look at intersectionality, whether it's race or people identify as transgender, immigrant women, and it goes up to at least 60 cents on the dollar. So that's why you just can't stop there. I think it's very important. We think of it as an ecosystem of equity, because you need equity of representation, equity of opportunity, equity of well-being, as well as equity of compensation. And if you ensure transparency, that you limit unconscious bias, it'll always be there. It's just a human thing. And you don't have adverse impact to intersectional groups in your hiring or performance ratings, promotions, stretch assignments, and opportunities in general. We then think that's how I believe, and we believe, that you can address true pay equity, and it stays. That the systemic thing that keeps you away from it, you begin to address those with this ecosystem of equity type of approach.
That's fantastic. Yeah, some really insightful comments there, Brian. Mary, do you think that this increased focus on things like opportunity and well-being is taking us down a path where we're starting to look at a new range of benefits, possibly new forms of flexibility? What are the things that you see on the horizon, especially from Hilton being at the leading edge? What are you exploring in terms of things that are going to help this space actually grow?
I mean, I think it has to take us into new places. And, I feel like any leader worth their salt should be welcoming that and approaching it with, an inquisitive nature and genuine curiosity. What we've probably seen, so the vast majority, so we've got about 460,000 team members across the world. 4,000 of them are in this part of the world. The vast majority are in operational roles where they are checking in guests or serving coffees. And so when we talk about even things like flexibility, up until probably pre-pandemic, that was really considered it's not for us. It's not for these kinds of industries. And really what we're looking at, in new ways of working, but also in terms of trying to be as inclusive and foster that sense of belonging, is just challenging around those traditional mindsets. So where can we look at things that are quite straightforward, but perhaps we've had traditional mindsets that have stood in our way? So, for example, in one of our hotels, we've introduced a 9-day fortnight for everybody who's full-time. So we've just made it you're in unless you opt out, because people said it couldn't be done in a hotel. So we thought, well, let's disprove that and give ourselves a competitive advantage. And actually, it's working fantastically. How can we look at things like the benefits that we offer? We know that we're a bit behind the pace with things like parental leave. So actually, we have to, make sure that we're pushing the barriers on that, because we want people to, know that they can have a longevity of career with us, and that we will be there to support them around every step of that parenting journey as well. There's some really interesting things coming out of Gartner as well, where they're saying, statements like the 4-day week is going from radical to routine. So I think that for all of us, what we're seeing is that where perhaps we might have been testing the boundaries with, whether it's to do with the location or the kinds of hours that people are working, actually that's now a real hygiene factor. So if we're not on board with it, then I think we have to find a way to get ourselves as leaders comfortable with trying out different ways. The key thing, though, that I suppose I would say is when it comes to any of these benefits, the people that need to make the decision are not the ones that sit in the corporate office. They're the people that are really going to be using and utilizing the benefits or not. So, what are the conversations that we're having with all of our food and beverage attendants, with our chefs, with our stewards? what are the things that they really value about working here, and what are the things that perhaps they would like us to try, because that for us has been, I suppose, the key eye opener, that actually the aspects of the working environment that perhaps we take as a given are things that actually they hold in quite high esteem. So I suppose I think we have to get more flexible. We have to perhaps let go of some of those traditional shackles. And even if you're in quite an in-person service-based industry, I think that's not a good enough excuse not to give it a try.
That's fantastic. Karen, Mary spoke about sort of hearing the voice of the people that are in the roles and stuff like that. And you spoke before about having some of your sort of resource groups. Part of what we said up front was it's about a great place to work for all. How do you pick up the voices of those that aren't big enough to be part of a resource group? So sometimes it's like First Nations people, or people that are, too small to even establish a minority. How do you hear the voices of those people in organisations like Specsavers?
Well, Specsavers is built on partnership, and we've been partnering with foundations like the Fred Holiday Foundation since, I think it's 2012, to enhance access to First Nation people. So our partnership supports eye services in underserved communities and strengthens the eye health workforce to ensure Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people can access the care they need. So at a local level, we support the Foundation's vital community engagement work, which includes training local community health workers and educating school children and community members in eye health and sanitation. But we've also got like an informal reconciliation plan that focuses on building and enhancing the cultural awareness and capacity for our teams, promoting inclusivity and positive race relations. We also practice acknowledging country at meetings and request elders when we have official welcome to countries at major events. We have lots of different activities that focus on education and awareness, such as NAIDOC Week, National Reconciliation Week. And we're in the process of developing cultural learning programs in collaboration with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island organisations for our people. But I know that's talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people, but for us also, we also encourage our teams to make a difference in their local community through volunteering, fundraising activities and workplace giving. We do essentially organise volunteering and charity activities, but we also support those team members who have their own charities or causes that they're passionate about. Everybody gets one paid volunteer leave each year, and we have fundraising grants whereby team members who are really passionate about some charity, they can actually raise their money, and then we actually Specsavers matches it as well up to $500. So we try to do a variety of things because that then captures, for the smaller minority groups as well. Yeah, because we have huge amounts of nationalities throughout all our stores.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and it's really important. I love the fact that you leverage partnerships to inform what you're doing, because it doesn't have to be all we have to think of this. It's actually how does the world see us? And we've all got customers, so how do we get our customers' voices on what we do and how we do that for them more effectively as well? I really love that turning around. I want to sort of ask a really controversial question. Maybe it's controversial. I'm mindful of the fact that we are at a point in time from a societal perspective where people have very different views at work. So as an example, in Australia, we had a vote recently on a voice to Parliament. And the majority of people voted against it. But in our workplaces, we're confronted with a situation where organisations are increasingly saying this is what we stand for, whether it's around marriage equality, whether it's around voice to Parliament. And internally, people are saying, well, I don't like the organisation saying that on my behalf. How do we respectfully listen to each other so that people actually can feel as though they belong, can bring their full selves to work? Is it possible, or are we now in a post-Trumpian era where we hide our true beliefs just to get along. Brian, that's a tricky question for you in the States, but I'm going to ask it of you.
No. And it's an excellent question. Number one, I don't think you could, even if you mandate it in some way as though you could, and that great companies don't do things like this, that people should not speak about certain things. Folks are going to talk about these things. So my belief set is to realize exactly what you articulated, that we're in a very complex environment. In fact, at Davos just ended a couple of weeks ago. Top two topics. It wasn't environment this year. The top two topics were the geopolitical landscape, specifically what's going to happen in the upcoming U.S. elections, and number two was AI. So from a UKG perspective, we foster conversation. That's what employee resource groups, they aren't only about the intersection that might be a dominant for that particular group, but they're also folks who can help guide us through these complex conversations across a number of intersections. And that's one. And number two, what I would counsel everyone is you're not going to get everybody on board. Everyone needs to respectably, I should say, engage in conversations, hopefully from the standpoint of I'm having this conversation so I could hear and listen and become aware of a different point of view. And ultimately, for many of those people, move towards advocating for that point of view. And on the other end of that, the zero-sum game mindset, I call it, some people really do like politics of division or politics of exclusion, where it's like, if I give to you, you've taken from me, therefore I'll never let that happen, and I'll create a world that everything is fair, and these things, people have problems, they're not my problem. Or people who want to be extremely activists. That's not the company. The company has to be for all, where every little thing is that it's like we must talk about everything. No. So focus on the influenceable middle, create an environment where people can dialogue respectably around topics with, again, the hope that they can move from awareness because you're gaining knowledge all the way to hopefully becoming an advocate because your lived experience wasn't that, but now you know enough to be able to tell 10 friends.
Mary, Qantas sort of stuck its neck out a couple of times on different things and got beaten up by particular politicians or even their own employees. How dangerous is it for organisations to say this is what we stand for?
I think if it is something that aligns with your values, I think if it is something that organisationally you're very clear that this is where you stand, I think that that's what you do. I think that organisations are a microcosm of society. I think we all have our place within our local communities, and so I don't think it's necessarily dangerous. But I think you make the right decisions for your organisational setup and for I guess what your team members are looking for as well. In many instances, we as an organisation, we are quite conservative, and so we don't necessarily take a stance. But I guess from a Hilton world, what we want to make sure is that our team members are as well informed as possible on both sides of every argument. Mm-hmm. So actually, if we're seeing, for example, with The Voice, that we have people who genuinely just aren't really sure or don't have access to the right level of information, then how do we just make sure that they do, and that they understand the information that is being given to them so they can make an informed choice? So that was a decision we took as an organisation, just to say, look, this is all the correct and I guess appropriate information. Now it's up to you.
Yeah. So focus on awareness, which is back to Brian's point, which is how do you bring awareness of the issues? Yeah. Karen, any other thoughts on that topic?
I actually agree with both of them because that's what we did here as well. It's about educating people on, the pros and cons of each one so that everybody can actually has education and understands what's there. And what really helps guide us is probably our purpose and behaviours, because that's where, from that, we're actually always striving to be the place where everyone can, be themselves. But as Brian, I think, said, and Mary, it's creating an inclusive work culture requires commitment and effort from everyone. So it's about embracing everyone's differences, fostering environments of respect, ensuring that everyone has the sense of belonging and equal opportunity. So that's why we have to give development, tools, all that sort of stuff to help build everybody's capability so that, you have awareness. If you don't, then that's when you usually make mistakes, I think.
And you mentioned before, actually, sorry, Brian, you were going to say something.
I was within the last point. We tell people, and then the way it's certainly in America and many other democracies, the best way to sort of voice is to vote. You know, not to have just debates just for the heck of having debates. If you really believe, then vote. Vote your conscience. If everyone voted, quite honestly, and in our country, I'll bash us a little bit. I mean, for 330 million people, you know, a good number don't vote, then you really shouldn't even be discussing it, because that we actually have in our democracy a way to have things to be decided. So vote. Vote your conscience, vote your values, and we generally, if people vote, the right things do happen. The majority's voice would be heard.
And Karen, you mentioned before having some really good things in terms of your measures and metrics around stuff like DEI and B. A question: how do we make sure that leaders in organisations don't see this as being a nice to have, that it's a soft, fuzzy, fluffy thing? Because I think that, you know, sort of being in HR or people and culture or belonging, you can get beat up around, well, these things are nice to have, but when push comes to shove, we're going to invest in over here because it's concrete. How do we transform the thinking of leaders in organisations that this is actually tangible to business results?
Well, like I said before, I always believe it really starts from the top. It can't be a standalone initiative. Simple, you know, tickets done because that's, you know, you've reached, you know, your journey. For us, especially because we're a franchise business with over 400 stores across Australia, New Zealand, we have an additional layer. When you're a company-owned organisation, you can make the decisions and set the standards for everybody. But when you're a franchise business, each our franchise business, we call them store partners. They're owned locally by each store partner, and they're run and they employ all their people. They set the people experiences. So we need to bring all our store partners along the journey. So to help that, we've created a Great Place to Work toolkit, which has a range of tools and resources for our partners, from, you know, for recruitment, onboarding, to development, wellbeing, to create an inclusive workplace. It's got lots of things in there. But we also openly talk about the return on investment and the importance of valuing people and supporting their diverse and inclusive culture, which in turn provides good experience for our customers. And then we explain the cost it has on their bottom line. So for those stores, majority of our stores are already in there, but there's always a few that, you know, they need to see what the return on investment is. So if you show it to them in their profit line, that actually really hones into them. And then they go, oh yes, it's really not that rocket science. You know, if we provide the best opportunities for our people and give them a good experience, they then go the extra mile for their customers and end up making more money for everybody as well. But if you're looking about that sort of bottom line stuff.
Any other views on that? I want to move us on to some questions that are coming from participants, but are there any other thoughts on how we make sure that it moves beyond the nice to have, soft and fluffy?
The last thing I'd say, and I'm excited about the questions that are coming, is it isn't a nice to have. I mean, if you think of this as nice to have, human beings only do things up to a point, and that's when they deem it nice enough. But people will do anything to thrive, you know, hopefully to the level that they don't take advantage of other people. So it can't be that other thing. It is the thing. At the root of your company is inclusion. That's what drives innovation. That drives employee engagement, retention. All of those things do net out to greater business impact and value. You think of it that way, it is who you are. It's being something. It's not doing something.
That's great. I'm going to, and look, really appreciate that there's participants that have been putting in some great questions. So I'm going to throw some questions from the participants to you. The first one's a question about any tips and learnings on working successfully with neurodiversity.
Yes, please let Karen, Nancy. I mean, Karen, Mary. I actually passionate about this topic, but please go first.
Go for it.
Yeah, I had the great privilege at SAP to, you know, under the guidance of the then CEO Bill McDermott, who was very curious, and that's a great CEO attribute, about, you know, how might we at SAP at the time, and I was leading diversity, equity, inclusion at the time, leverage the amazing talent of the neurodiverse, specifically people on the spectrum, to the degree that we set a goal of 1% of then SAP's global population would have people who would identify on the spectrum. Why is that? Neurodiversity, I call it genius of another kind, meaning there are skills that neurodiverse people have that are extraordinary that supposedly non-neurodiverse people don't have, but because of some of the social differences and the way some of those individuals might engage, we somehow think there's something wrong with them, when in essence they have abilities that many of us could never achieve. So I think you have to be very, very thoughtful. And there are great organizations that teach you. By the way, it's not changing them. You need to change yourself, which is what belonging is. Meet people where they are. And there are underemployed people who identify on the spectrum. And in a world where we're all looking for amazing talent, extraordinarily amazing talent, I think I would encourage anyone and everyone to lean in. And SAP has published a lot of things around their neurodiverse program. I would say it was at that time and continues to be even after I left best in class.
Fantastic. Mary, I'm going to throw the next question to you. How do you hire for this trait for inclusion for leaders? So, do we tend to focus enough on that, or are we looking at leaders' technical skills? How do we make sure we're hiring for DEI B amongst our leaders?
Sure. I mean, essentially everything that we do is around values. When you operate in hospitality, you can teach people a lot of the technical skills. And so at every level, it is around, not about creating a world where everyone is the same, but you need people to come and buy into the values. We're very clear and transparent about what we stand for. So whether you are asking, whether you're doing profiling in terms of, Savile Holdsworth or other personality testing, that kind of thing, whether you are just overtly talking about it, we try to make our selection processes quite conversational. Even with our most senior leaders, we need them to spend time with the team that they will be immediately leading. So it's not about creating a popularity contest, but it is, the teams. For example, if we bring in a general manager, their next line of directors will expect to have a coffee with them. We'll ask them, what have you done to promote women in leadership, or what have you, what are your views on this? So it's not something which is seen as a nice to have. It's, to the conversation that happened before, it's something which is seen as actually this is a hard business measure and it really matters to us. So, what do you do in terms of volunteering, in terms of, how do you really grow the team and the community around you? So, it certainly forms part of that capability framework that we assess people against.
Great. Thank you. Karen, there's a question here for you. Do your employee resource groups have any decision-making powers? So you spoke about them a bit, but are they advisory, or do they actually decide on some things? And do they make recommendations to the business on policy changes or product shifts?
So with our employee-led networks, we do have steering committees, and for those, they'll come in and they do some research, see what everybody wants, and they will come in with recommendations. So quite often, with which do come into fruition, and so myself and another board member sponsor them, different board members, and so what we do is they come in with their recommendations, why, how it's going to improve the experiences for our teams. A recent one last year was probably in our parenthood one. We converted one of our old meeting rooms into a room dedicated just for people who wanted to express milk, or just when their children come in and what they need to do. Because some people used to go into the car park and do that, which you didn't realise, and then you go, oh my God. And so that sort of stuff. So we thought, okay, so they came in with a recommendation of what they needed, and we changed that straight away. So we've got dedicated spaces for our parents, and it does actually help with our policies, because then we can say, oh, okay, that actually is too formal. Because sometimes when you look at it, you look back retrospect, you think, oh, that is actually quite constrained. So from that, we do. They can't just change the policy themselves. However, they do influence it quite a bit. We look at it and see what we can do, and then take it from them. And we tell everybody afterwards it was from the Parenthood employee-led network or PRISM or whatever it was, so people know why and how.
That's fantastic. I love that idea of a group then saying, well, we didn't even realize this was the impact. How could this be used for more people as well?
Yeah, you don't realize that. The
No.
voice of people is very important, and you
Yeah.
have to listen.
Which sort of leads to my next question. Brian, you mentioned belonging before and it being quite an individual thing. So one of the questions is, what are the sort of metrics you can use to measure belonging? If it's not something that we do, but something you feel, how do I know?
You ask, everyone, many of our companies have sentiment surveys. I would suggest, and it is certainly in the Great Place to Work Trust Index questions, if you're on that path towards being certified, you ask, do you feel like you belong? And there are a number of other questions around that, which we can share with this audience that measure belonging. But in the end, if you just ask the question, do you feel as though you belong? It becomes, and then you analyze the data after you get those results along these intersectional lines, it will show you how you're doing and quite honestly, where are the areas of opportunity. So the beauty of it is for all, everyone wants to belong. I laugh sometimes and said, you remember when we were young, people, and whatever game we played, you don't want to be the last person picked, whatever it was. Think about that time. If you were the last person picked, that's not a very good feeling. So you just remind people you don't want to have that feeling in any part of your professional journey where you're not valued. Your uniqueness should be valued and you should be empowered, not the opposite.
Yeah. How do you, and this is a question for all of you, but I'll ask Mary because sort of just take it in turns. How do you influence old school managers? And we all know them. We all know the old school managers that maybe don't buy into this and maybe a bit reluctant to change. Is it a matter of, well, this is what we stand for, and if you don't like it, then maybe your future lies elsewhere? Or do you have programs in place to help them change?
I think for me, it's all about the personal stories, because I think if you've got someone who genuinely has is really blinkered and has lived an extremely sheltered life. I mean, firstly, I can't believe that you've got to a senior leadership role, but in some regards, but also, understand. And I guess, you can set people the challenge of actually have these conversations with people who aren't like you. And that is, I've got to say, from our organization, that is really celebrated. The fact that is what our senior leaders do as habit. And it's not necessarily just about, saying, going and asking people, do they belong or not? Because they might not necessarily have the trust if they're within that mindset. But it's also, it can be about saying, okay, well, what might get in your way? What gets in the way of you being the best version of yourself at work? What can we help you? What can we do that might help you to be better? What might we do to help you feel, more like yourself at work? So for me, it's all about, they need to tap into those personal stories. And we do make a real effort to share those. So our team member resource groups will do courageous conversations where we talk about uncomfortable topics. So, we invite them to do that. But essentially, if you've got someone who has absolutely zero sense of empathy whatsoever, I would challenge if leadership is for them.
Yeah. Any addition to that, Karen or Brian?
Karen?
The only other thing I would actually say, sorry, did you want to go first, Brian?
No, I'll say Karen, please.
There is that sometimes it's actually measures, because quite often I see it would be a store or department that's usually got high attrition, low engagement, and they're just, people aren't happy in their team. It's usually because how they're being led. So you could help them by showing them, like, if stories are definitely 100%, you need to do that as well. It's like a combination of things to actually get their hearts and minds, but also show them the facts. Because some people, for us, we've got a variety of different people, and some are led by their hearts and minds, and some are just by facts. And so if you've got both, you can show them, so that then it's not like telling them off, but then say, okay, this is what it is, but this is a great opportunity. You can change. And let's actually do this. And this is how we can, and we support and partner with people to do that.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add is, and we said it earlier, if we've established, and we know correlatively leading to causation, that companies that embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, social impact are more, sort of profitable. And we have the data at Great Place to Work and others to prove that. And so to the degree that the old school mindset does not lead to inclusion, does not lead to equity, diversity, or belonging, then someone, to the beautiful points made by Karen and Mary, you have to be willing to be on that journey. Otherwise, you're hurting the chance of your company being its best. So if a leader is not in on all that, then to perfect point there, Mary, they probably shouldn't be in leadership. So got to thread that needle of the why. Now, this isn't about you. This is about everyone thriving. And if you're not willing to do the things necessary for our company to be most innovative and to have great business outcomes, maybe you should not be in that seat anymore.
We are just about at time, and I'm going to sort of ask each of you in turn so there's a number of questions about, how do we start on this journey, and, what's one bit of advice. I'm going to ask each of you for the one bit of advice that you would give to organizations or to HR professionals or participants on this call who are just saying, well, what's one thing that I could do differently from when I go back to the workplace? What would your one piece of advice be? I'll start with you, Mary. Sorry.
So my one piece of advice would be, this is not a nice, clean, clear journey that stays in a spreadsheet. So be prepared to embrace a bit of chaos. It's all about individuality being nurtured. So embrace the chaos, ask the uncomfortable questions would be my advice.
Embrace the chaos. I love that. Speaks to me personally. Karen.
I think it's actually having diversity inclusion groups or employee-led networks and things like that, because it's talking to a wider group of people and getting everybody's thoughts and ideas, because generally they have better ideas than you by yourself.
So get people together of like groups and get their voice, get the voice of the people. Fantastic. Brian.
This is going to sound like a setup for it, but I mean, the great place to work, Trust Index, people think that that's only large companies. The wonders of Hilton. Start at whatever level asking questions. It gives you great insight as to where you are today, and then pick one thing or two things, and you will know that is going to put you on that journey to the beautiful point that Mary and Karen says. This isn't an overnight fix. It's like, are you curious as to where you are? Do you have the will to be somewhere else? And then start to sort of pick things, just like you do in every other part of the business of import. You figure out how to get better. Continuous improvement is how you get there.
Look,
it definitely does take continuous improvement. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
We didn't do it straight away. So it took quite a few years. But then if you listen, this is what happens.
Yep. Baby steps. Can I just take the opportunity to thank Brian, Karen, and Mary? Awesome insights, great experience. And if anything you take away, embrace the chaos, take your time and basically do it by baby steps. Listen to participants, listen to your employees. Look, it's fantastic insights from you guys. We hope to do this sort of thing, these webinars again. At the end of this webinar, for people who've been listening in, you will be sent a survey. Please take the time. It will guide us in terms of what we can do differently, better, the same. If you want to know more about Great Place to Work, and Brian mentioned the Trust Index, which is an employee engagement tool, then check out the website, greatplacetowork.com, or contact us on comms@greatplacetowork.com. But seriously, it's been fantastic time. The time has just flown. I can't believe every time I checked it. But appreciate everyone's participation. If you know people that were also wanting to look, then we will make sure there's a copy of the video available through our website and probably through YouTube as well. But please join us next time for our webinar, and have a great rest of this week. And thanks for your time today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.